You feel the need to lose 10 more pounds, and it was just like this vicious cycle where it was never good enough. I felt the thinner I got, the less space I took up, the more desirable I was in the eyes of everyone. I'll have an issue with weight in my mind until I die, I'm sure. One of the biggest things you can do for your health is lose some weight. Any of this sound familiar? Most of us have been surrounded by comments about weight our whole lives. As a current or future healthcare provider, we have seen how the doctor's office or hospital is no exception. But is recommending weight loss really the best we can offer our patients? Is weight loss even a sustainable goal? We'll dive into all this today as we discuss weight cycling. What is it? What does the current literature have to say about it? What are some of the limitations of those studies? And finally, why is this something we should care about? Weight cycling, often referred to as yo-yo dieting, is the process of intentional weight loss followed by unintentional weight gain. Simple enough, right? The caveat to this definition is that when studying the impacts of weight cycling, researchers haven't decided on a consistent definition as to what amount of weight or what technique of weight loss meets criteria for weight cycling. But we'll talk more about that later. Okay, you may say, people go on diets, their weight goes down, and then they often regain that weight. So what? But the simple fact matters because of its prevalence. The most recent US CDC national survey reported that 49% of individuals over the age of 20 have intentionally tried to lose weight within the past year, a percentage that has been steadily rising since the 1980s. It shouldn't be a surprise how ingrained the weight loss mentality is, with such immense societal pressure telling us we need to be a certain weight, usually thin. Social media, celebrity and influencer endorsements of diets or workout plans, aggressive magazine headlines, disapproving BMI posters, even the offhanded comments at holiday family get-togethers. The pressure to lose weight can feel all-consuming at times. Unfortunately, this usually includes a visit to the doctor as well, whether that means being recommended a weight loss medication, or lifestyle changes or a diet. Weight stigma is deeply built into healthcare environments as well. In turn, trying to lose weight is a very, very common experience. We have good evidence that sustainable weight loss is not realistic for most people, with studies showing 70 to 80% of individuals who intentionally lose at least 10% of their body weight, so 15 pounds for a 150-pound person, will regain it within a year. And that, quote, the best available evidence demonstrates that conventional weight management has a high long-term failure rate, end quote. The majority of people who intentionally lose weight will gain back most of the weight they lost, and some may overshoot. In other words, they will weight cycle. Looping back to why should we care about this? We know that close to half the people we meet will have tried to lose weight in the past year, and most of them will regain this weight. At the same time, we know that weight loss is regularly recommended in the doctor's office, with little to no discussion around the very limited sustainability of weight loss or any detrimental impacts weight cycling may have. Weight cycling is everywhere, so it's important that we understand the implications of this. The effects of weight cycling have been studied for decades, and yet it remains a hotly debated topic within the literature. Why is this the case? You would think that by now we would have a clear answer one way or the other. A large part of the answer is what was alluded to earlier, the lack of standardized criteria for weight cycling. As an example, here are a few of the definitions of weight cycling published in a 2024 systematic review. These are all quite different experiences, and yet the results are being compared as though they are discussing the same intervention. Another factor is wide variety in study design and methodology. Let's take the foundational 1994 systematic review of meta-analysis as an example. For many years, this paper was held up as conclusive evidence that weight cycling had not been proven to have a negative impact on physical health, and so weight loss should still be encouraged. But when we actually look at the studies that were included in this review, we notice that almost none of the studies had the same definition of weight cycling, the majority of studies depended on self-reported weight cycling history, there was no differentiation between intentional and unintentional weight loss, there were variable levels of control between studies for demographic features such as age, sex, BMI, or other medical comorbidities. Populations that were studied vary greatly, from adolescent wrestlers to obese women with and without binge eating disorder to men with type 2 diabetes. It should be no surprise the results between these studies were inconsistent. However, the underlying conclusion of the paper was there is no convincing evidence that weight cycling in humans has adverse effects on body composition, energy expenditure, risk factors for cardiovascular disease, or the effectiveness of future efforts at weight loss. And this is the message that was carried forward, despite the studies that do show harm from weight cycling, which demonstrate osteoporosis, increase in gallstones, mortality, and increased insulin resistance. So, which is it? Does weight cycling impact your metabolic health or not? Study after study was done, aiming to assess the impact of weight cycling on the risk of developing diabetes, of cardiovascular disease, of overall morbidity and mortality, of impact on resting metabolic rate, and the results have remained somewhat inconsistent. The current literature continues to report conflicting findings, with some studies citing little to no adverse impact of weight cycling, others citing increased risk of metabolic and cardiovascular disease, or risk of developing type 2 diabetes. It can be confusing to see so many apparently conflicting findings, and overwhelming to analyze all the different studies within these systematic reviews. However, there are common themes that appear across many of these studies that can help us understand the limitations of these reviews and explain why the outcomes appear to be so inconsistent. Let's look at the SINEA 2024 systematic review. 23 studies were included, but only 7 of these studies had a sample size greater than 100. Most had a very short duration of study with limited follow-up. Most did not control for any confounding factors, did not have a consistent definition of weight cycling, and depended on self-reported data. Crucially, most only investigated the impact of weight cycling on body composition and resting metabolic rate. Very few assessed impact on morbidity or mortality, which is surprising given the risks shown in some studies above, and makes it difficult to make any true conclusions around risk of harm. So we know there are limitations to the systematic review as a whole. What about the findings of the individual studies? While many have clear flaws, such as a sample size of 5, some appear not too bad. For example, the 2022 study done by Halali. This Finnish study was a secondary analysis of a study on in-person versus digital tools on diabetes outcomes. It looked at the association between weight loss history and various metabolic and psychological outcomes in adults at risk for type 2 diabetes. Participants completed blood work and questionnaires both pre-intervention and 1 year later. Their results show that individuals with no history of attempted weight loss showed the most significant decrease in fasting plasma insulin and increased sense of control over their nutrition. In contrast, those with previous weight loss attempts had a decreased sense of control over their nutrition and little to no change in their fasting plasma insulin levels. To summarize, this is one of the studies that showed weight cycling does cause physiologic harm. There are several strengths of the study compared to others in the systematic review. The sample size was quite large, allowing for more robust data to analyze. They collected a broad range of outcomes, including both metabolic markers and psychological measures, in contrast to many of the other studies that were limited to body composition and resting metabolic rate. Finally, they did control for some variables, such as co-use of antihypertensives and statins. However, there are still many limitations to this study. While the sample size was larger, the participants were predominantly female, 80%, and had self-selected by interest in lifestyle intervention. The never attempted weight loss group was only 4% of the total sample size, or 101 individuals. This both highlights the prevalence of attempting to lose weight and makes it difficult to make any large conclusions when comparing such disparate size groups. They relied completely on self-reported data for weight loss history and sense of control over nutrition. For weight loss history, they only gathered data on number of attempts at weight loss with no measurement of the amount of weight cycled or by what method of weight loss. And the study only assessed changes over 1 year, so we can't know what the impact of the interventions may have had over the longer term. This deeper dive into a single study highlights common flaws that often go unnoticed in systematic reviews, such as a reliance on self-reported data, limited duration of study, limited generalizability of findings, even in studies that are more robust. Although not perfect, the study of 2,684 people that showed harm, in this case increased insulin resistance with weight cycling, was given the exact same weight as the following studies that did not show harm, such as a study of 5 young women who went on 2 30-day diets, a study of 6 collegiate wrestlers, and many more studies of similar small sample size, usually over less than 1 year. This misleads readers to think that the, quote, mixed results came from equally strong studies. Until future research addresses these issues, systematic reviews will likely continue to show inconsistent findings. With so many potential confounding factors in human studies, many people turn to animal studies, where weight cycling can be induced in a controlled environment. However, this comes with its own set of challenges. While there are some studies on single mouse strains that did not show a persistent change in resting metabolic rate with weight cycling, a follow-up study by the same researchers in a more genetically diverse mice did show adverse outcomes. In this case, that was insulin resistance. At a minimum, this suggests that genetics have a role to play in the response a body has to diet changes and the impact weight cycling has metabolically. Perhaps that is why adverse outcomes aren't always seen in the very small studies. Looking into mechanisms on a cellular level, a recent animal study assessed changes in RNA expression, which determine which proteins a cell makes in response to weight cycling. They found that fat cells, also known as adipocytes, after weight cycling showed persistent upregulation of inflammatory pathways and downregulation of metabolic pathways. So does the inconsistency in the literature findings mean we don't need to worry about weight cycling as healthcare providers? To help answer that, let's pivot away from the physiologic impact for a moment. We know that mental health plays a large role in our overall well-being, so let's explore the psychological impact of weight cycling. Here, the data is much more conclusive. Multiple studies have found a clear correlation between weight cycling and higher prevalence of depressive symptoms, binge eating, and disordered weight management, such as extreme restrictions or the use of diuretics or laxatives to lose weight. Internalized weight stigma was also seen to be a key contributing factor between weight cycling and depressive symptoms. The 2024 study, a qualitative model of weight cycling, developed a schema representing the experience of weight cycling based on a thematic analysis of in-depth interviews with individuals who have experienced weight cycling. Key to the process was both experiencing weight stigma, with examples being offhanded comments from family, coaches, or health professionals, and the internalization of the stigma, which kept them in the cycle. A story shared on the Brain Over Binge podcast gives an example of how this can start at the doctor's office. As an active 8-year-old girl, the guest on this podcast states her mom started to become concerned when she started to gain more and more weight. Her mom brought her to the doctor's office, where the doctor promptly told them that she is obviously eating too much, and that from that point forward, food started to become prohibited. She shares she didn't really know what was going on, but she did know that something was keeping her from food, and so she began to binge eat in private, which was an ongoing problem for her. She was diagnosed with PCOS at 17, and she's had a lifelong struggle with binge eating and weight cycling, something she was not able to fully break free from for over 30 years. So, what does this all mean? Let's take what we do know, which can help guide our thinking moving forwards. Number 1, focus on weight can have a major harmful and long-lasting psychological impact. Experiencing weight stigma can encourage people to start weight cycling, which is associated with greater depressive symptoms and disordered eating habits. Number 2, for the majority of people, intentional weight loss is not sustainable and will be followed by weight regain, weight cycling. 3, the mechanisms behind weight loss and regain are more complicated than we used to assume, with emerging evidence of epigenetic memory and transcriptional changes impacting the process. There is some evidence that weight cycling is an independent predictor of new onset diabetes and has been adversely associated with cardiometabolic markers. 4, future studies would benefit from establishing a consistent definition of weight cycling to better compare studies on the physiologic impact of weight cycling. In medicine, we weigh the risks of any intervention against the benefit. With the strong risk of psychological harm, at least some evidence of physiologic harm, and the likelihood of weight regain anyways, is there really any benefit worth the risk? Maybe. The answer to that question is up to the patient. But patients can't make that decision unless healthcare practitioners provide accurate, informed consent when recommending weight loss. And yes, there is an alternative to these never-ending circles of weight cycling. It's called weight or size inclusive care, and you can learn more about it at these links.